here because that's the hottest place in the world. And when you've been sick for a week or so, I don't really want to get too hot up there. So I'm going to stand right here for this morning and probably this evening as well. I do want to say before we start, I appreciate you all bearing with me this week. Thank you to Ben last Sunday for, I think I called Ben at 8:30 and said, I'm not going to be able to be there. But Ben's told me for 43 years, I think he had two ready because Brent came. And I appreciate Brent coming Sunday evening and then Wednesday evening as well. So I'm sorry for being unable to be here, but I appreciate so many of you all called and sent me texts. And I was over here yesterday making the bulletin copies, and I got a text from Maria. And she just told me, she said, I have missed you and we've missed you, and I can't wait for you to be back. And it made me, I don't know what I felt like yesterday, but I went from here to here just from that. So Maria, I appreciate that so much. She was out for a few weeks herself with the illness a couple months back. And so I'm glad I'm glad for what she said, and it meant a lot. The last time that we were together, we've been talking about a series that we're covering called Making Our Calling and Election Sure. And there was a handful of lessons that we were going to discuss. And the first two that we talked about was putting on the armor of God and then loving your neighbor as yourself. And we read this in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 10, where it says to be even more diligent to make your calling and election sure. And if you were listening to or following along with the scripture reading there just a moment ago, Solomon addresses one of the most important choices that a person can make, and that is their choice of friends. That is their choice of companions. That is the choice that we make of the people that we are going to spend time with. And, it's unfortunate probably that these decisions are made by those who lack experience. I've spent a lifetime working with people between the ages of 13 and about 16. Make 10th graders, which I've taught for most of the time, that sometime in that 10th grade year, people turn 16 and their decision making gets a little bit better. Now, it doesn't get perfect, but it gets a little bit better. But choosing companions is one of those things that comes along as a young person. And so you might be thinking, well, wait a minute now. I'm clearly older than 13, 14, 15, or 16. This is a impractical lesson for me. But I don't think that's the case, because we still have companions both at work, in our neighborhoods, in our social groups that we might be a part of, but also even in the church. I want to talk this morning about what we see when we think about choosing good companions. And we're going to look at 3 examples of companionship within the Bible as well. The principle in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33 says, evil company does what? Do you know the answer to that? It said it corrupts good morals. Do you believe that? Do you believe that? Your mom told you that, right? The person that you were running around with, she said, you're going to get you in trouble, right? Or some version of that. You've all been told that, and some of you said that same thing to your children along the way. Solomon expressed something similar when he said, he who walks with wise men will be wise, but then the companion of fools will be destroyed. So the question for us is, who is the wise man, the wise woman that we're going to walk with? And who are we going to choose to distance ourselves from just a little bit? And while it might be geared toward younger people, it's going to be geared toward us that are a bit older as well. Let's talk about the need. I'll probably do that a time or two. I apologize. Let's talk about the need for close friends. I think we need close association with other people. I don't know that we have to be friends with everybody in the world, but we need close associations with people in our life. And I think it's a challenge to happily or meaningfully live our lives only by ourselves. That's difficult, right? I'm not saying it can't be done, but that's difficult. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18 says, it's not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him. Now, I know that's speaking of marriage, but isn't it nice that there are people that are comparable to us that we can spend time with? The friends that we've that we have in contact with, the people that we spend time with are people that share like interests. I have a really, really good friend, one of my best friends. We don't talk as much as we used to, but I know that about 3 minutes into the UK basketball game, I will get a text message from him. And he's already going to point out problem, and possible solution right there, right? We have this same connection. Not a single one of you, well, maybe one of you, not many of y'all have ever texted me during a UK basketball game, Mel. I've been waiting for years for Melvina to say, all right, here's what I know. But we don't have that kind of connection, right? I have connection with certain people. But now there are other people that we have these connections with, right? We have friendships, but our companionships, these are close associations. These are people that we share commonality with. Romans chapter 14 and verse 7 tells us that none of us lives to himself, so no one dies to himself as well. And so we need to love our friends the way that we need the love our friends have for us. We'll get that spit out here in just a second. We need to know the same thing that Solomon wrote in Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 17. Proverbs 17 and 17, in a nutshell, someone loves us no matter what may come our way. How many of you have went through something difficult in your life? How comforting is it to know that somebody loves you, right? Somebody's there for you. And there's people that you might be companions with that aren't really there for that, but it's nice to know that there's people that are there. We have people that can share, as it says up there, the joy and happiness. How many of you have ever had something good happen in your life? You said, I can't wait to tell so-and-so. I can't wait to call so-and-so. Well, we want to share that joy. We want to share that happiness. We need someone to help us when we need cheering. How many of you have ever been in a spot where you said, I don't feel real good, but I'm going to call so-and-so. They always make me feel better. Or it's been a rough week, but I can't wait to see so-and-so at church on Sunday. I was experiencing that on my drive over this morning. I was thinking, wonder who I will see first. All right. We're comforted by that. You know, we need relaxation. We need recreation. We need enjoyment with these people that we share commonality with. We need something that can take away the pressure, the routine of life. If I gave you a sheet of paper right now and I said, list the reasons that you need good friends, could you fill that sheet of paper up? I'm not asking you who they are, but why do I need friends? We could probably feel there's a real liking for and confidence in another person. I kind of like that, right? It's a pretty good description. So I'll ask you right now, who do you have a real liking for? Anybody in your life that you have a real liking for? Well, I don't really know how to describe that, but somebody that you really like. There's probably some people in your life that you maybe have a little bit of a liking for, right? And some of them I kind of like when they ain't there. But, for sometimes we have people that are a real liking for. We also have people that we have confidence in. How important is that? There are people that you could call and would be at your home before you hung up the phone. That's somebody that we have confidence in. Our companions need to be described in that way. Oddly, the word friendship occurs just one time in the New Testament. James chapter 4 and verse 4. Ben was talking this morning in class about context. I want to sort of notice the context of what's being written about in James chapter 4 and verse 4. It says, adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Doesn't stop there, but it goes further. It says, then whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world, then makes himself an enemy of God. And so that word friendship, the one time we see it, it says if we're choosing this wrong friendship, we're going to pull ourselves away from God. We're going to make enmity. We're going to make difficulties. We are removing ourselves from our connection. So that's an important picture painted about friendship. I think we could say that friends, companions, fall into two categories, right? Good, bad. I guess you can make a third category that was indifferent, but I want to think about good and bad for just a moment. So I would say then that good friends are those who are not just good to us, but also good for us. There's a lot of people in your life that are good to you. There may not be as many people in your life that are good for you. That's the difficulty that we face. That's the thing that I struggle with working with kids all the time, is how do you realize this person might not be good for you? And that's really hard to pull somebody aside, because I say the person that's sitting beside you is bad for you. That's a difficult thing, because you remember when your mom told you that, right? And you remember how you reacted. No, you don't know, Mom, right? Mom and Dad were always so dumb, weren't they? Just dumb as could be. Didn't know nothing. Continue to get smarter as they got older. As I got older, maybe they got a whole lot smarter. You can all relate to that, right? But it's hard to tell somebody this person might be good to you, but they might not be good for you. We're going to look here in a few minutes at some examples of people that were companions in the Bible, that were good for each other in the Bible. Bad friends, though. I put a few things up there. I think there's 6 things. But these are people that are disrespectful, negative. Do you know people that are disrespectful? I've known people in my life that are just disrespectful to everybody. It's frustrating. It's difficult to be or even around them sometimes. People that are negative about everything. People that are critical. And what I see a lot with people that I work with at school, people that are manipulative. People that are conflicting. And people that are unreliable. I'm not going to ask you to list people that would fall into those 6 categories, but you probably could come up with them, right? But I hope that in many cases, that if it's people that have not been good for us, then we've removed ourselves from those places. Let's talk for just a few minutes before we finish our time together today about some Bible friendships, Bible relationships, Bible companionships. We're going to look at 3 here to start with. We're going to start with David and Jonathan. The book of Samuel tells us a bit about this relationship between David, who I'm sure we all know, and Jonathan, who you may not be remembering exactly, but Jonathan was the son of Saul, who was the king. And David had just, we're going to pick up, David has just defeated Goliath. And we know the story, right? That Goliath puts out the challenge and really nobody was capable of doing it. And then David comes forth and he doesn't. And how did Goliath look at David? He looked at him and he kind of laughed at him, right? He said, this youth, right? This kid isn't going to be the one who's going to be able to do it. But you know how the story goes, right? That he was successful in what he did. But David has just defeated Goliath, and he's brought before the king. And I want to pick up there in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. Now, when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And so we see that there's a connection almost from the get-go right here. Verse 2, Saul, the king, took him that day and would not let him go home to his father's house anymore. And so this shows that now David has sort of risen up in the ranks, as it were, right? If the king says, I need you to come to my house and I need you to stay, that's probably not something that a lot of people get called on to do. And then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. In verse 4, and Jonathan took off the robe that was on him and he gave it to David. And with his armor, even to his sword and his bow and his belt. Now think about that for a second. We were having this conversation in class the other day. We were in the class, we were talking about how did somebody become king or queen? And I throw the question out to the kids, and they're like, well, it's because of who your dad is. And there were some other ways as well. But Jonathan is the son of the king, right? And so Jonathan, we would think here is like, he's the king's death away from maybe becoming the king himself. But he has this friend, and he says he gave him his robe, he gave him his armor, he gave him a sword, his bows. Honestly, he gave him all the things that we read about in the putting on the whole armor of God, right? I doubt there's been many kings' sons, many princes, who have given their stuff away like that. Sometimes friendships and companionships take a while to build, but sometimes they seem to leap into existence almost fully formed. I think that's what we see right here. After what David had accomplished with Goliath, Jonathan recognizes the potential of David right there. When Jonathan offers the robe, the armor, the sword, the belt, all this stuff, he's almost making a gesture welcoming David into the family, but in many ways sort of placing him ahead of himself. Now, that would be difficult, right? If your dad is the king, that means the odds are that you're about to be the king. A good friend, a good companion, not only recognizes the strengths and the abilities of one another, but they're not afraid to promote somebody else. They're not afraid to say better than me. Sometimes we find ourselves saying, well, I can do this better than anybody else, even if we can't. But if you're a good companion, you're going to say the best person for that job is right there. They are the one, and give them the credit or whatever it would be. But sometimes we get greedy in our own personal desire, and we sort of shun the companionship. That's not what we saw with Jonathan. Let's look at the second one. This is Elijah and Elisha. I just want to say real quick, if I say the wrong thing, I apologize. Sometimes I get these two mixed up just by spoken word on it. But like David and Jonathan, I think most of us have had close friendships with peers throughout our life, right? The one that's a little bit rare is the one between the mentor and the mentee, right? The older and the younger. It's pretty easy for me to say, well, my best friends, the people that I'm closest to in life, all are within 5 years of my age, one way or the other. But it's not as common for me to say, well, I'm 40. What is it, Mom? 43? I'm 43. And my best friend is 78. That's not real common, right? But I want to think about Elijah and Elisha for just a second. Elijah has been a prophet for a while. And the pressure here seems to be getting to him, right? We know how it is to do something for a long period of time or to work at something. It's like, man, it's just getting tough. There's a lot that we've got going on right here. And he's hiding in our story here. He's hiding in the mountain from King Ahab, who wanted him dead. Well, that's probably a good reason to hide, right? But in 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse 16, God calls the prophet, calls him back into the game. He tells him, he says, to anoint Elisha to succeed him as a prophet. So we've got this new, and this young guy is going to take your job, thinking about it the way that we would consider it. Now, this is a forced friendship, right? This is not the person that sat next to me in math class and we've been friends ever since. No, this is God telling him, he says, you got to go connect to Elisha. And so from that point forward, Elisha becomes a shadow to Elijah. He follows Elijah, learns everything he could from Elijah. And when Elijah's time is coming to an end, and it was time for Elisha to focus on life without his mentor, he still refused to leave the prophet's side. Let's go to 2 Kings chapter 2 for just a second. Stay here, please, said, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not. Now the sons of the prophets who were at Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, do you know that the Lord will take away your master from over you today? And he said, yes, I know. Keep silent. Then Elijah said to him, Elisha, stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me on to Jericho. He said, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. So they came to Jericho. Now the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho came to Elisha and said to him, do you know that the Lord will take away your master from over you today? And so he answered, yes, I know. Keep silent. And Elijah said to him, "Stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me on to Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. You can keep going right there, but this shows the connection there between the two. In many ways, we can see that Elijah is almost saying, you need to stay back, right? I'm going to move on. I'm going to go on forward right there. But he doesn't want to leave this connection. Think about that age gap. Think about the difference between the two. But he spent all this time with Elijah, has spent all this time with Elijah, and he wants to stay right there with him. We can't overemphasize the importance of developing relationships with people that are older than us. That's an important thing for us. I was watching something, I shared it with Dad, it's been a few months ago, but the Iroquois Indians in New York. You may have seen the game lacrosse played before, but lacrosse, you have a stick with a net on it, and you throw a ball, you try to make it into a goal. It's about 1,000 years old game, but it developed with the natives in and around the Great Lakes. But there was a man that was there, and this was back, well, it's not been that long ago, but he made wooden lacrosse sticks. And these sticks, it took a lot of work because think about it, most wood is straight, and you've got to heat it up, you've got to get it wet, you got to be able to turn it so you can make a loop at the top. And in the show, which was really an interesting little show, it showed how he made it. But he had a couple younger boys that were there that he was showing how to do it. But I would imagine then that he had people that showed him how to do it. And this is a game that's been played for 1,000 years in and around the state of New York, Canada, Michigan. These traits had to be passed on. Well, they don't really need it anymore. Most lacrosse sticks are made out of fiberglass, and you don't really need the wooden sticks. But he was carrying on something that he still had there. At the end of the show, the guy, he dies of cancer. And so I don't know who's going to make those sticks going forward. But all of us have relationships with people that are eventually going to go on. But what can we take from those people? And in particular, those people that we set beside in the church, those people that are sitting there that quite often are very quiet, quite often haven't said a whole lot. What can I learn from them? Because those are the people that are here every time the door is open. Those are the examples. Those are the exemplars of Christianity. If I don't take anything from them, if I don't develop a relationship with them, how does the church grow? Because one of these days, you or me is going to be the old person sitting in the pew. You may already be, but we all will be. But I hope that there's this many people in the room when it's me that's sitting there as the oldest person in the room as well. But if we don't develop that relationship and those companionships between those people, it can't continue. Third one, Paul and Timothy. Sometimes we need friendships that will challenge and encourage us. We need companions from people that won't just say, okay, but will put a challenge to us as well. Paul had met Timothy on his second missionary journey throughout the Mediterranean, and he'd become something of a spiritual mentor, right? He's sort of a religious teacher to Timothy. Timothy joins Paul on the journeys, and their relation grew to the point that Paul actually describes Timothy as in 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 2. He says, "My true son in the faith," right? That's a pretty strong statement to make about somebody. Call them your son, even if they're not your actual son. But I want to think about for just a second. I'm going to spend a lot of time on it, but I want to look at three things that we'll see here. First of all, our friendships, our companionships have to be intentional. Have to be intentional. In Acts chapter 16, Paul intentionally chose Timothy to travel with him so that Timothy would grow. Because Paul's a lot older than Timothy, or at least he's spiritually older than Timothy, we'll put it that way. But I think Paul sees something in Timothy that when I'm done, this young man can carry it on. Paul introduces Timothy to what he was already doing. Paul's preaching and teaching and going here and there. I think for us, companionship doesn't have to be a big formal contract or a contract or some kind of announcement. But for us, the example here is maybe just a simple invite to church, right? Because in many ways, what Paul does is he invites Timothy to go on to this trip. Now, we saw on Paul's missionary journeys that it didn't always go swell, right? A lot of times there was difficulties. There was even conflict. They sent John Mark back, right? They said, this guy ain't ready for this, right? But he chose Timothy. He invited Timothy. Well, the lesson for us right here, the invite that you send, the asking that you do, is it guaranteed to be successful? No. But it needs to be intentional in that I have a desire for you to be here with me. It has to be focused as well. Companionship has to be focused. Paul encouraged Timothy to continue learning from the Word of God so that he would be, in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 14 through 17, so that he would be equipped for good works, right? We have to be equipped for good works as well. How are we equipped for good works? Well, if we go back a minute ago to the lacrosse stick, you got to have the equipment or you're not going to be very successful at the game. If everybody on the field has a stick and one person doesn't, you're probably going to be the worst player on the field, right? You got to be equipped for it. Well, the gospel is what equips us for good works, but not if we're familiar with it, not if we don't know it. As followers of Jesus, we equip each other, right? We help each other. We study. We learn how to be more like him. And as a friend, we have to do that just the same. But the third thing then is that not only does it have to be intentional, it has to be focused. It needs to be continual as well. How many of you have ever had a friend treat you poorly? How many of you have ever had your feelings hurt by somebody that you were close to? You don't have to raise your hand, but I'm sure every one of us could, right? How easy is it to say, done with you? Well, sometimes we might need to, as Paul would write later, shake the dust off our feet. Sometimes we might need to. But I want to think for just a second about Jesus on the cross. I want you to think about Jesus on the cross. And we read in the Gospels about how Jesus says 7 statements on the cross. But what we don't know is what was actually running through Jesus's mind, right? We know what was said, but we don't know what was running through his mind. But I want to think for just a second. I want you to consider this as well. When Jesus is on the cross, there was a group of people there below him. I wonder how many people in that crowd Jesus recognized. I wonder how many people in that crowd Jesus looked down and said, I've seen you before. I know you. I'm putting, sort of my mindset in this. But how many people did he see that might have been there as an eater when they had the 5 loaves and the 2 fish? How many people might have been there as a friend or maybe a relative of somebody who was healed, somebody who was made to be able to walk, or somebody whose withered arm was made straight? How many of those people do you think were cheering on the crucifixion of Jesus? These were people that were friends, but now they're not. Now, if Jesus had been like me, he'd have probably said, I'll do this, but for you and you, but probably not you, because you seem to be cheering against me now. Never won. We were the bad friend in the relationship, but his companionship with us was continual. We have to be the same way. We have to be the same way. We have to ensure that our companionship, both with the people in the church, the people outside the church, but more importantly with God, is continual, and it's an investment that will be fruitful and lasting. Friends, companions, are priceless. And I think we should be thankful for all the ones that we have. But there's no greater friend than Jesus. Jesus said in John chapter 15, verse 14, he said, you are my friends if you do what I command you to do. Now, that may not be a great thing for us to say to our friends, but Jesus was a better friend than any of us could ever be. And we know that he'll hold up his end of the bargain provided that we hold up our end of it as well. If there's any way that we can help you, whatever it is, we invite you to come while we stand and sing.